And I knew some line had been crossed, that some terrorism had been done fundamentally upon educated media government people. And I said to myself, yikes, the anthrax attacks, that's the most important piece of business. And if you remember, it went silent for many years. And then Bob, I'd worked with years earlier, had come to me after we had not been with each other for a while. He was in Africa. I was in New York. He came to me and said, Eric, what's up with these anthrax attacks? And I said, you know, Bob, I think this is the most serious thing that we as investigative journalists can take a look at. And I know you at CNN have tried, and I know me at a million other mainstream outlets had tried. Let's be independent. Let's see what's really going on here. And that became the genesis of our investigation.
Now, again, you guys are joining us not just on the radio, but live in living color from New York at prisonplanet.tv. The film is Anthrax-War. The website is anthraxwar.com. Again, you can also get the film there or at infowars.com. Now, this film needs to be seen. Gentlemen, let's start getting into the evidence of this being a cover-up, but just briefly mentioning what happened at that time. I was obviously glued to television and radio, covering the 9/11 attacks myself, and 9/11 kind of built its peak of hysteria, and then suddenly the anthrax, and for a week or two, it was as big as the 9/11 attacks, and they were taking over the Capitol and the federal government. The executive was ordering the Capitol evacuated, which was a violation of the separation of powers, and Democratic enemies were getting sent anthrax, and people that had taken photos of the Bush daughters in Austin falling down on each other drunk in a provocative pose were getting the letters, and it was clearly meant to blame it on Muslims, and the FBI said, this is run-of-the-mill, no big deal, but I had bioweapons experts on saying this is incredibly deadly. Only Russia, the United States, and England can make it this deadly. Then it turned out it was the super miniaturized with the bentonite, magnetized. I mean, it was the special, sci-fi grade U.S. signature, and of course the film covers that. And then the different patsies, and then murdering a patsy, and they finally got a patsy they could shut up because the last two patsies were proven innocent. So let's go over that. But I mean, you guys are journalists, TV guys. You were there at the time. Wasn't for a week or so the anthrax as big as 9/11, and then it's like it never happened?
Absolutely. I mean, this was our sort of scariest nightmare come to life, the attack of invisible germs. This is something we could not see. These were, who sent it? It went through the mail. This was an attack against all of us because it was sent through the mail. This could have gone to everybody, and it was
everybody gets the mail. The perfect psychology. Go ahead. Yeah.
And in some ways, it also fed on our fears that had been tickled, let's say, by so many of these Hollywood movies about, bio attacks. But here it was, real life. And it caused huge panic across the U.S., across the globe. There were copycat attacks. Cipro, this antibiotic that was the treatment for anthrax. Their stocks went through the roof. People were buying Cipro. But as you said, Alex, after a couple of weeks of being in the headlines, the story faded. The FBI announced it had this huge investigation, but it's pretty quickly seemed that investigation was not going anywhere. I mean, they had this so-called person of interest, this Army scientist by the name of Stephen Hatfield, and very early on, the FBI were convinced that they could blame it on one person. There was a lone gunman. There was just one person behind this. And that's one of the things that we decided to look at. We said, well, actually, it's much bigger than this. We've actually got to look at this from an international perspective because, the kind of anthrax that was sent, especially to Congress, was very, very sophisticated. When the FBI scientists examined the anthrax that was used in the attacks against the congressman, that anthrax, when they examined it in the lab, in this BSL-3 lab, high containment lab, they put it on a microphone, a microscope, and the anthrax actually lifted up and floated into the air. And the scientists had never seen any anthrax of this sophistication ever before. So this was super sophisticated anthrax, and it really meant that this had come out of a state-sponsored program.
That's right. I mean, it was a U.S. government weapon strain. It was miniaturized. It was magnetized. It was coated in bentonite. It was made to float around.
Well, the thing was, the original report said it was coated in bentonite. Now it's put
so that's wrong.
It is wrong, and it was put forth by ABC News correspondent Brian Ross. There was no bentonite in that, but it was very useful because U.S. intelligence had identified bentonite as a additive that the Iraqis had. So you see how the administration began to say, there's an Iraqi connection because of this bentonite connection.
Well, stay there, gentlemen. I want to go over this. Anthrax-War. We've got to go to break. When we come back, I want to go through the evidence that it's an inside job or a cover-up, but also what were the motives? Was it an aborted false flag to blame Iraq? Where did the trail lead? The good old folks at New Silver Solution. And the website is supernaturalsilver.com. Supernaturalsilver.com. This is something that kills bacteria, viruses, you name it, well documented. They've got it down to a super small nano-sized particle. Supernaturalsilver.com. Check them out at Infowars.com. And this film is really well done. Everybody needs to see Anthrax-War. I mean, the White House, Ari Fleischer admitting that much of the White House was on Cipro starting September 10th through the attacks. But nobody else was when they knew it was going to be going through the Capitol mail system and some of it to the White House. I mean, this is really, really suspicious. But that's only one area. Going back to our guests, the makers of Anthrax-War, Bob Coen and Eric Nadler, you guys know how to tell this story best. You guys have got the floor. This is a short segment. Long one's coming up. Run through what the film covers, the evidence, and bottom line, what your conclusion is, what the anthrax attacks really were in Anthrax-War.
Well, the deal is one has to look at who benefited and who gained ultimately from the anthrax attacks. When the FBI named lone mailman Bruce Ivins as their guy, they said he had a profit motive, $2,000 government contracts or whatever, to get the anthrax vaccine that he was working on in Fort Detrick, Maryland, to be reinvigorated and put forth for the U.S. military troops. We asked a legitimate question. If they're saying profit motive for a lone gunman, who really made money off these attacks? And we have to be careful here. We're not really pointing any fingers, but we're suggesting that one looks at what is the real legacy of the anthrax attacks. And without a doubt, within the last few years, the U.S. government, in the wake of the anthrax attacks, has leased $50 to $60 billion in what they call biodefense contracts to fight against bioterrorism. And one of the things we do in the film, and one of the things we do in the book, is begin to examine the corporate connections. Who's making the money? Who's making the $50 to $60 billion? And once the FBI lets the profit motive as the attack lay into Ivins, we think that's a real legitimate place to look. And in the book, we spend a lot of time looking at very politically wired corporations that have benefited, no doubt, through government contracts in the government response to the anthrax attacks.
Absolutely. And, in fact, expanding on that, and I want Mr. Cohen's take on this as well, and of course yours, Mr. Nadler, is as you said, $50+ billion for BioShield and other programs, level 4 bioweapons labs in major cities, expanding the U.S. bioweapons program in a cover for bioweapon defense. Even mainstream news has admitted that. They wouldn't have gotten all of this if it wasn't for the anthrax attacks. They got all those major contracts and that policy shift in the war on terror right after the anthrax attack.
Absolutely. I mean, certainly that has been one concrete result of the anthrax attacks, is the birth of what we describe as the bioterror military-industrial complex. And the other troubling thing about all this is that what used to be the domain of secret government programs is now privatized. So we have private corporations who are doing this classified research that's going on in private labs, in university labs, in private research foundations all around the country. People have no idea what's going on in those labs.